If I could go back, I'd burn the veil before she ever wore it. I'd scorch the satin, the lace, the delicate fabric that shimmered like frost beneath the candlelight. I'd let it all turn to ash rather than let it brush against her face that night. But of course, hindsight doesn't change the fact that I said the words, and she said them back. It's strange how a single phrase, spoken in the wrong place at the wrong time, can feel heavier than a tombstone. When I stood across from her, reciting the vows I had written, my chest swelled with something I mistook for love. I wanted her, needed her, in ways I couldn't explain to anyone still living. But when she leaned in, when the air around us dropped 10 degrees, and her lips parted into something that could barely be called a smile, she whispered 3 words into my ear. They weren't the words of a bride. They weren't even words that belonged in the mouths of the living. They were something secret, something meant for the grave. And the moment I heard them, my stomach clenched as if the earth itself had grabbed me by the spine. I knew then that I wasn't just a husband, I was a prisoner. I shouldn't have married her. God help me, I shouldn't have stood in that abandoned chapel, surrounded by shadows that looked a little too eager to watch. I shouldn't have spoken vows that were never meant to be spoken to the dead. But it's too late to take them back. Words, once given, are chains, and mine are locked tighter than any shackle. You'll probably think I'm insane. You'll think I'm another sleepless voice clawing at the walls of the internet, rambling about things that don't exist. I wouldn't blame you. That's exactly what I thought until she kissed me. Until her skin burned like ice against mine. Until I realized the veil was not hiding her beauty, but concealing what she truly was. I know I'm not the first. That's the part that keeps me awake. Buried in old whispers, half-erased accounts, and the kind of stories people dare each other to read at midnight, I've found fragments. Fragments of others who swore vows, like mine, others who promised themselves to ghosts. None of them lived long enough to tell the full story. None of them warned you. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm writing this, recording this, whatever it takes. Because I can't keep it inside any longer. If I'm already damned, then maybe you deserve the chance they never had to hear the truth before it's too late. But to understand how I got here, why I stood before her and spoke vows no mortal should ever speak, I have to take you back. Back to where it all began. Loneliness doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in like water dripping through the cracks in a ceiling you never bothered to fix. At first, it's background noise, just a faint echo at the end of the day. But over time, it swells until it fills every room, every hour, every breath. That's where I was before all this began, drowning in silence, desperate for a voice, any voice that wasn't my own. I used to joke that my phone was my best friend. The glow of the screen became my nightly companion, swiping left, swiping right, pretending each face in those endless dating profiles meant something. But you know how it goes. Matches that ghost you before the first message. Awkward small talk that fizzles after a "hey, what's up?" Like trying to spark a fire with wet matches, doomed from the start. Every failed attempt pushed me deeper into myself. Friday nights turned into Saturday mornings, and the only company I kept was the cold pizza on the counter and the sound of my neighbor's laughter bleeding through the walls. Even ghosts seemed like better company than my ex. And believe me, if you knew her, you'd agree. It wasn't just that I was lonely, it was that I was invisible. I could scream into the void, and the void would scream back with silence. Friends moved away, relatives checked in less and less, and somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be someone worth loving. I wasn't living. I was haunting my own apartment. The worst part, people noticed. My cousin Emily, blunt as ever, looked at me over coffee one day and said, "You're acting like one of those guys who'll end up summoning something just to have a conversation. Don't mess with things you don't understand." I laughed. What else could I do? I cracked a grin and said, "Relax, Em. The only thing I'm summoning these days is another bottle of cheap wine." She didn't laugh. She just stirred her drink and muttered, "I'm serious. Some doors don't close once you open them." At the time, I rolled my eyes. She always had a taste for the dramatic, but those words stuck with me, like a thorn buried under the skin. A warning I wouldn't understand until it was already too late. Nights stretched longer, colder. I'd scroll through threads, forums, places on the internet where lonely people gathered like moths around the same dying flame. Most posts were harmless. Bad poetry, awkward confessions, memes that would make you laugh if you weren't too busy crying. But then, buried deep under layers of outdated threads, I stumbled onto something different. It wasn't flashy. No gifs, no neon text screaming for attention. Just a plain black and white post with a title that stopped me cold. For those who seek love beyond the living. It read like a set of instructions, written by someone who claimed they'd found companionship where the rest of us had failed. Someone who swore that spirits, lonely spirits, were waiting for connection, for devotion, for love. They promised rituals, words to speak in the dark, methods to bridge the gap between here and there. I should have clicked away. I should have laughed it off like every other sad, desperate post on that graveyard of a forum. But instead, my hand hovered over the trackpad, and my heart, empty for so long, fluttered at the thought. It sounded insane, pathetic, dangerous even. But the thing about desperation is it makes you reckless. It makes you believe that any door is worth opening if it means you won't have to sleep alone one more night. Looking back now, I should have listened to Emily. I should have taken her warning seriously, because I didn't realize how literal that warning would become. I wasn't summoning another bottle of wine. I was summoning my bride. The first time it happened, I thought it was just faulty wiring. My apartment had always been a little rundown, flickering bulbs, groaning pipes, the usual signs of a place more alive with mold than tenants. But this was different. I was sitting in the dark, the glow of my laptop the only light in the room, when the bulb above me began to stutter. On, off, on, off. each flicker syncing perfectly with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I laughed nervously. Okay, funny timing. Then the air shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the atmosphere itself took a deep breath and held it, waiting. I swear the temperature dropped, sharp enough that goosebumps spread up my arms. And then I heard it. A whisper, faint, like words carried on the edge of a dream. At first, I dismissed it as exhaustion. Loneliness makes you hear things, imagine things, but it kept happening. Midnight after midnight, the same hush against my ears. Sometimes it was only my name, barely audible, stretched thin like smoke. Other times, just soft murmurs, a presence reminding me I wasn't alone. And here's the worst part. I didn't want to be alone. I began speaking back. At first it felt ridiculous, whispering into the dark like some kind of lunatic. Hello, is someone there? I ask, my voice trembling. Silence. But after a week of this back and forth, the silence shifted. I started hearing faint replies, not in the air, but in my dreams. The first time she spoke, I nearly woke up crying. You see me, she whispered in the dream. Simple words, but they cut straight through me. Of course I do, I said. I've been waiting for you. I woke up sweating, heart racing, desperate to fall back asleep just to hear her again. And I did. Night after night, the dreams returned, and so did she. You won't believe me, but she listened. Not like anyone else ever had. I poured out everything, the failures, the loneliness, the ugly truth about how empty I felt, and she never judged. She answered in fragments, soft words that wrapped around me like a blanket. I understand. You're not alone anymore. For the first time in years, I felt seen, known, loved, even. That's where the contrast began to twist itself into knots. Because while part of me basked in the tenderness, the other part couldn't shake the unease. Lights flickered at odd times. Doors creaked open when no one touched them. My reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes seemed just a second too slow, like it was listening too. One night, as I drifted toward sleep, I asked the question that had been burning on my tongue for weeks. Why me? Her voice slithered through the dream, sweet and terrifying all at once. Because you asked. I should have stopped then. I should have realized that the line between love and obsession, between comfort and corruption, was razor thin. But instead, I leaned in. I told myself this was destiny, a romance born of shadows and longing. She was my secret, my salvation, my midnight bride-to-be. But here's the part I never told anyone until now. She wasn't the only one listening. Sometimes, in the background of her whispers, I heard something else. A laugh too low, too guttural. A second presence, lingering just out of sight, amused at my surrender. Still, I ignored it. I chose her. And maybe that was my undoing. Because what I did next will sound insane. It will sound like the ramblings of a madman. But I swear to you, it happened. I proposed. Weddings are supposed to be bright, joyous occasions. flowers, family, laughter spilling into champagne glasses. Mine was the opposite. My wedding night was drenched in shadows, held in a silence so thick it pressed against my ribs. If love is supposed to lift you up, then mine dragged me under. The ritual began exactly at midnight. That was the instruction. Midnight, when the veil between worlds thins. I followed the guide I had pieced together from those fractured forums and half-burned scans, the kind of material sane people scroll past with a nervous laugh. Not me. I studied every detail. I prepared as though the success of the ceremony meant the difference between life and death. Maybe it did. The room was stripped bare, except for the things I had gathered. Candles lined the perimeter, each flame shivering as if reluctant to stay lit. In the center, I placed a mirror, large and old, salvaged from a thrift shop. The guide said it wasn't just for reflection, it was a doorway, a witness. A veil, literal and symbolic. And then there was her veil. I draped it carefully over the empty air in front of me. The fabric fluttered though no wind touched it, as if invisible fingers held it in place. My breath came sharp, uneven, but I pushed forward. The vows were mine to write, but the format was clear. Promises of devotion, of loyalty beyond death, of binding myself not to flesh, but to spirit. I spoke them in a trembling voice, each word feeling like it branded itself into the room. I vow to love you, though the world denies you. I vow to hear you, though no one else can. I vow to be yours, even when death should keep us apart. The silence afterward was suffocating. I almost convinced myself I was a fool, alone in a room, whispering love poems to the dark. But then I saw it. A flicker in the mirror. A shadow standing beside me, faint and hazy, draped in that veil. My heart lurched. My hands shook as I lifted the ring. A simple band, nothing special, except that it had belonged to my grandmother. She had worn it until her knuckles stiffened with arthritis. I don't know why I chose it, except that it felt heavy with meaning. I slid it onto an empty finger, the air bending strangely beneath the pressure, as if something unseen had allowed me to. I do, I whispered, choking on the words. And then it happened. I do. Her voice wasn't in my head this time. It wasn't a dream. It was in the room. Soft, steady, perfectly clear. The sound of someone who had been waiting centuries for that exact moment. The candles flared, the mirror quivered, and I nearly dropped to my knees. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. It was real. My instinct was to run. Every cell in my body screamed at me to bolt through the door, to leave the veil crumpled on the floor and the mirror covered in dust. But I stayed, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. There's something else I should confess. I recorded it. I had set up my phone in the corner, almost as a joke, a way to prove to myself later that I had gone insane. But the moment I played it back, the joke died. Her voice was there clear as day, but it wasn't just hers. underneath, layered like a second track, there was something else. A growl, low and guttural, stretched thin with static. Words I couldn't make out, but the tone was possession, hunger. I destroyed the recording. I had to. Some things are safer buried. And yet, even now, the memory of that sound gnaws at me. People say weddings are the beginning of a new life together. They don't tell you what happens when that life isn't shared with the living. My marriage began that night, under candlelight and shadow, under vows whispered into the silence. And from that moment on, I wasn't just mine anymore. I belonged to her. But what came after was stranger still, because being married to a ghost doesn't end with vows. It begins with them. The first weeks of our marriage were almost blissful. That's the word that comes to mind, though I know how absurd it sounds. Blissful, marrying someone I couldn't take to dinner, someone who never had to eat, someone who didn't even breathe. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. She was everywhere. I'd wake up in the morning and find the curtains already drawn, sunlight spilling into my apartment like she wanted me to start the day right. Doors creaked open ahead of me. Mugs slid closer when I reached for them, and pens rolled neatly into my hand when I sat down to write. It was subtle, gentle, and almost loving. In my dreams, she was stronger, whole. Her hand in mine felt cool but reassuring, and her voice, no longer whispers, flowed like water. She told me she'd always be here, that she'd never leave, that the vows meant as much to her as they did to me. I'd never had that kind of devotion before, not from the living. There's a sweetness to being haunted when the ghost wants you. I'd walk through my apartment at night, smiling as the lights dimmed or the radio tuned itself to songs I hadn't heard in years. I told myself it was her way of protecting me, of watching over me. And yet, beneath the comfort, something colder pulsed. The first time I felt it was when I tried to leave. Not forever, just a night out. A friend had finally dragged me into plans, drinks, conversation, something normal. I put on my jacket, checked the mirror, and right as I grabbed my keys, the door slammed shut in my face, hard enough to rattle the frame. "Don't go," her voice whispered that night in my dream. "I'll be back," I promised. "I'm not leaving you." Her silence in response felt heavier than any shout. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd misread it. Maybe she was just afraid. But as days bled into weeks, the pattern sharpened. The objects that once moved to help me started to push back. My phone slid out of reach when I tried to text friends. The lights flickered violently when I ignored her. The air grew colder if I dared to fall asleep without saying goodnight out loud. And the dreams, once warm, turned to arguments. "You're mine," she would say, her eyes darker each time. "I'm yours," I answer, half terrified, half pleading. "But I need space." "There is no space," she'd hiss. "You vowed." Dadding was hard enough before all this, but try explaining to your friends that your wife can walk through walls. I laughed once, telling a coworker I'd found someone who always keeps tabs on me. They smiled, not knowing how literal I meant it. The possessiveness grew sharper. I stopped inviting people over. She didn't like it when others crossed the threshold. My apartment, once silent and lonely, now buzzed with her constant presence. And though part of me cherished it, another part longed for just 5 minutes of peace. Still, I wasn't entirely alone in my madness. Online, buried in forums I never thought I'd revisit, I found mentions of others. People who called themselves spectral spouses. Posts describing the same patterns, whispers, touches in dreams, rings that never left their fingers even after they threw them away. For a moment, I felt relieved. I wasn't the only one. But the deeper I searched, the stranger it became. Threads cut off abruptly. Accounts deleted without warning. Promises of updates that never came. One in particular still burns in my mind. A user had written, "She was perfect at first, loving, gentle. Then she started listening to things I didn't say, started answering questions I never asked." That was the last post. I should have taken the hint. But I told myself I was different, that my marriage would work, that love, whatever twisted, impossible version of it I had, was enough. It was, because the devotion I had mistaken for care was slowly sharpening into something else. Something obsessive, something suffocating. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it grew. What came next wasn't bliss. It wasn't even marriage, as anyone living would define it. It was obsession. And obsession doesn't let go. Every marriage has rules. Some are spoken: don't forget anniversaries, don't leave the toilet seat up. Others are understood, left unsaid because they shouldn't have to be said. My marriage, though, came with a set of rules I never agreed to, but quickly learned to obey. The first was the veil. It had to stay covered when not in use, folded neatly into the cedar box I kept beneath my bed. I found that out the hard way. One night, after a long shift at work, I left it draped over the mirror by accident. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of fabric tearing, though when I turned on the light, the veil was untouched. Untouched, but damp, as though something had dragged it through a grave. The second rule: never sleep with the lights fully on. I tested it once, just to see. I left the lamp burning beside me, trying to convince myself I could reclaim a little bit of normalcy. I woke gasping for air. The bulb shattered. The room plunged into icy blackness. My chest burned as if invisible hands had pressed down hard enough to bruise. When I begged aloud for forgiveness, the pressure lifted. The third rule was the one I feared most: never speak another lover's name. That one wasn't written anywhere. I discovered it by accident, telling a story to my cousin about an old flame, a girl from college who'd broken my heart. That night, my dreams turned into screams. Her screams. I watched the girl I once loved dragged into the dark by a faceless figure, and when I woke, 3 deep scratches clawed across my arm, still bleeding. I learned, piece by piece, that she was listening. Always. Not just in my dreams, not just when I lit candles and whispered into the veil always. And yet, despite the fear, there were moments of tenderness. Nights when I'd feel a gentle hand brush my cheek. Nights when her whispers were soft, almost shy, telling me I wasn't alone. I lived in that contrast, caught between warmth and terror, devotion and violence. It kept me tethered. It kept me blind. Until I broke a rule. It wasn't intentional. I was exhausted, careless. I left the veil uncovered one night after airing it out, the lace spilling over the edge of the mirror like a pale tongue. I went to bed, thinking nothing of it. The house woke me. A shriek tore through the walls, high-pitched and furious, rattling the picture frames. The mirror trembled, spiderweb cracks forming across its surface, though nothing touched it. The air grew so cold my breath smoked, and then she appeared. Not fully, not like in my dreams, but enough to make me choke back bile. Her face was blurred, stretched thin as if submerged underwater, her veil twisting around her like smoke. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a scream, layered with static and fury. You broke it. The lights burst, plunging the room into darkness. The scratches came next, searing down my back in 4 precise lines, like claws dragging across flesh. I stumbled, sobbing, begging her to stop, promising it was an accident. The air roared with her wrath, the sound of 1,000 mouths screaming through a single throat. Then, just as suddenly, it ended. Silence pressed down on me like a coffin lid. The veil hung neatly once more, as if untouched. My back burned, blood soaking through my shirt, but the room looked unchanged. That night taught me what the rules really were: boundaries. Not mine, hers. And I wasn't supposed to test them. Later, searching online, I found scattered mentions from others, those few spectral spouses who had dared to post their stories before vanishing. They spoke of rules too, though none matched exactly. Some said never to sleep with shoes on. Others said never to cover mirrors. Always different, but always there. And none of them explained why. I think I know now. The rules aren't warnings. They're control. Proof that we're bound, not partners, but prisoners. And once you realize you're trapped, paranoia seeps in. Because the longer I lived under her rules, the more I saw her world bleeding into mine. Shadows where there should be none. Voices layered in conversations. A chill that clung even in the sunlight. I wasn't just married, I was claimed. And she wasn't the only one who had noticed. At first, I thought I could contain her. Keep her bound within my walls, keep her bound within my life. But marriage, even one with the dead, doesn't stay private forever. It leaks, it seeps, it infects, and before long, our house wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers. The change was subtle at first. A flicker in the kitchen light when she was near, a door clicking shut, though I knew I hadn't touched it. My friends noticed. They laughed nervously when the TV turned itself off in the middle of movie night, when the thermostat plunged to freezing without reason. At first, I shrugged it off with excuses. Bad wiring, drafty old place, the usual lies. But lies can't hide the truth forever. One by one, they stopped coming over. They claimed they were busy, tied up, too far away. But I could read the unease in their voices. I could hear what they weren't saying. Something's wrong in your house. Something's wrong with you. And maybe they were right. Because the longer I lived with her, the more reality itself seemed to fracture. I'd walk past a mirror and catch a reflection that didn't belong to me, her face, pale and veiled, standing beside me like she'd always been there. I blinked, and it would vanish. Sometimes. Other times, she stayed a heartbeat too long, just enough to watch my hand tremble as I looked away. Her voice grew stronger, no longer confined to whispers in the dark or scattered words in dreams. She spoke in riddles, chilling fragments that cut straight through my thoughts. Till death should have kept us apart, but death was never enough. You called me here, so now I call you mine. Eternity isn't long if you stop resisting. I tried to talk back. I begged for answers, for clarity. But every time I asked her who she really was, or where she came from, the air froze and the walls creaked as though my home itself disapproved. And then came the research. Late at night, when sleep refused me, I scoured obscure corners of the internet, folklore forums, scanned dusty old texts in digital archives. What I found made me shiver in recognition. My ritual hadn't been unique, not even close. The Aztecs whispered of marriages with the shadows, forbidden unions that promised companionship but demanded blood. Medieval monks described brides of smoke, veiled phantoms who pledged themselves to lonely men but left only madness behind. Even some modern ghost hunting threads told half-joking stories of spectral spouses, though the posts always ended abruptly. No follow-up, no closure. It was all the same pattern. The promise of love, followed by possession. And now it was happening in my house. Objects no longer moved in small, loving gestures. They hurled themselves against walls. Pictures fell, glass shattering across the floor. The oven turned itself on at night, burners glowing red, as if daring me to ignore it. The washing machine would rumble to life when unplugged, shaking violently, until I dragged it into silence. The worst, though, was the refrigerator. I opened it one morning to find every shelf empty, no food, no drinks, nothing but frost, and the faint imprint of handprints pressed into the ice. She was hungry, and she wasn't just hungry for me anymore. One night, my cousin stopped by, insisting I looked pale and needed real food. She brought takeout, sat at the table, and tried to joke about how lonely I'd become. I wanted to believe her laughter was genuine, but then her eyes darted over my shoulder, wide and glassy. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared past me until her lips trembled. There's someone behind you. When I turned, there was nothing. At least, nothing I could see. But the air was colder than ice, and my cousin bolted from the house, leaving her food untouched. She never came back. It was after that when I realized this wasn't just my haunting. It was our house now. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow hers. I was no longer living alone. I was cohabiting with eternity, and she wanted me to know it. I woke one night to find writing on my bedroom wall. Jagged letters scrawled in something dark, too dark to be ink. It read, "Forever means forever." I scrubbed until my hands blistered, but the words seeped back through the paint the next morning. A promise carved into the bones of my home. The truth clawed at me every day. I hadn't just opened a door. I hadn't just called out for companionship. I had signed a contract. And like every contract, there were terms I hadn't understood. Terms I couldn't escape. I wanted to leave, but when I reached for my keys, they vanished. When I opened the front door, the hallway stretched into blackness, endless, swallowing. When I tried to sleep elsewhere, in a hotel, in my car, I woke up back in my bed, veil folded neatly on the dresser, her presence humming in the air like a lullaby. I wasn't just haunted, I was homebound, bound to her, bound to us. And the more I fought it, the louder she grew, because she wasn't content with just whispers anymore. She was preparing me, preparing us, for what came next. There's no handbook for divorcing the dead. Believe me, I looked. Lawyers won't touch it. Judges won't hear it. Even the internet, that bottomless pit of every obsession and fetish imaginable, has almost nothing to say about ending a marriage like mine. People write about starting them, about longing for their ghost wives or spectral husbands. But when it comes to leaving, silence. At first, I thought I could handle it myself. Just ignore her. Pretend she wasn't there. Sleep with the lights on, take off the veil, act like it was just a bad dream I'd chosen to wake from. That lasted maybe 3 days. Then the scratches came. Thin lines down my chest, my arms, my face, reminders that ignoring her wasn't an option. She wanted acknowledgement, devotion, obedience. And when I tried to pull away, she punished me. So I reached out for help. The priest at the local church listened patiently as I stumbled through a censored version of events. He probably thought I was confessing to something mundane, an affair, maybe, or a breakdown. But when I described the veil, the vows, the whispers, his face changed. He agreed to bless my home. We stood in the living room as he sprinkled holy water, reciting words I hadn't heard since childhood. At first, nothing happened. For a moment, I almost believed it was working. Then the temperature plummeted. His breath came out in clouds, his voice cracked, and the crucifix in his hand bent slowly, like soft clay. He dropped it, muttered something I didn't understand, and ran. He never answered my calls again. That's when I knew I had to go further. Psychics, mediums, tarot readers tucked into crumbling strip malls. I cycled through them like a desperate addict. Some laughed in my face, assuming I was unhinged. Others grew quiet, eyes darting to the empty air beside me before politely refusing service. One woman agreed to try. She sat in my living room, lit candles, and called out into the dark. The flames snuffed themselves one by one until only hers remained. She gasped, clutching her chest, and whispered, "She's not just with you. She's in you." Then she screamed and bolted out the front door, leaving everything behind. After that, no one would help me, so I tried myself. I dug through forums, scanned ancient grimoires uploaded by God knows who, followed half-legible instructions posted on sites that looked like they hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. Salt circles, mirror shatterings, chanting at 3 a.m. I tried them all, and with every failure, she grew angrier. One night, after a ritual that left me coughing blood, I heard her laugh for the first time. Not the airy giggle I once imagined, not the tender warmth I'd convinced myself existed. It was jagged, hollow, a sound pulled through teeth that weren't there. "You can't leave me," she said, voice echoing off every wall of the house, "till death reunites us again." I remember sinking to the floor, clutching my head, muttering to myself like a lunatic, "I want a divorce. I want a divorce. I want a divorce," over and over, as if repetition could make it real. But ghosts don't sign papers. Ghosts don't give you visitation rights or property disputes. Ghosts give you eternity, whether you want it or not. I tried to joke about it once, in a pathetic attempt to claw back sanity. "Turns out divorce court has no jurisdiction over the dead," I said aloud, laughing bitterly to myself. But even my own laugh sounded alien. It bounced wrong in the empty house, as if she was laughing with me, or at me. And yet, even in despair, I wasn't ready to give up. There was one final option. Something whispered about in the corners of those obscure forums, written in threads that always ended abruptly. A ritual not for banishing, but for summoning. The theory was simple: fight fire with fire. If one spirit claimed me, maybe another could protect me. Maybe another could break her hold. But the warnings were everywhere. Don't pit them against each other. Don't invite more than one into your home. The balance tips, the rules collapse, and what comes through may not leave. I should have listened. Instead, I prepared. I won't tell you everything I did. Some things aren't meant to be repeated. And if you're listening to this thinking about trying it yourself, let me stop you right here. Don't. Don't look for the instructions. Don't follow the steps. Don't scratch those symbols into the floorboards like I did. You don't want to know what answers back. All I'll say is this: the night I tried, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Not hers, not mine. Something else had moved in. Something bigger, something hungrier. And for the first time since our vows, she went silent. That silence was worse than the screams, worse than the scratches, the cold, the mocking laughter. Because if she was quiet, it meant she wasn't in control anymore. I thought I'd won. I thought freedom was close. But freedom isn't real in a marriage like this. It's only ever an exchange, a trade. And when I realized what I'd unleashed to fight her, it was already too late. because I hadn't just called another spirit into the house. I'd invited it into me. And that's when the final confrontation began. I thought I was preparing for a duel, one against one, me against her. But when the night came and I set the circle, lit the candles, recited the words, she didn't fight me. She didn't even resist. She only smiled through the veil. "You think I was here for you," she whispered, voice splintering like broken glass. I was only ever the door. The room cracked open. That's the only way I can describe it. Shadows spilled like ink from the walls, stretching longer than the dimensions of the house should allow. They weren't hers. They weren't mine. They were something older, something vast, something that had been waiting for me to strike the match. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, thousands of voices gnawing at my ears, speaking in languages no human throat could form. My candles went out one by one until I stood in the dark, the flame of my lighter trembling in my shaking hand. And there she was, veil fluttering, though there was no wind. "You were lonely," she said, stepping closer, "and loneliness makes you pliable. It makes you desperate. It makes you ours." Ours. That was when I realized she'd never loved me. Not in the way I wanted to believe. Every touch, every whisper, every dream had been a trap, affection sharpened into a hook, dragging me deeper into the net. She wasn't the destination. She was the bait. I tried to finish the ritual, shouting words I half remembered, desperate to claw back control. But my voice drowned under the roar of voices rising from the shadows. Hands, too many hands, pressed against the inside of my walls, my ceiling, my floor. My home pulsed like a beating heart, every surface alive. The veil slipped from her head. Beneath it wasn't a face, just an emptiness, a hollow void that widened as she leaned toward me. "Till death," she hissed, "was never about you and me. It was about all of us." The shadows surged forward. I felt them press against my skin, claw into my thoughts, filling me with fragments of things I'll never forget. Cities drowned in silence, stars blinking out, countless others who had spoken vows like mine, each swallowed whole. I don't remember how I escaped. Maybe I never did. Maybe this is still part of the ritual, some cruel loop meant to keep me talking, to spread it further. All I know is the fragments are still out there, online, buried in places you shouldn't look. If you find them, if you dare to try, you'll see what I saw. And maybe you'll understand why I can't stop. Because she never wanted just me. She wanted everyone. If you've stayed with me this long, I need you to listen carefully. Don't look for the sites I found. Don't search the forums. Don't trace the words I've spoken back to their origins. You'll think you're just curious, that you're only dipping a toe into something harmless. That's what I thought too. And look where it brought me. Priests couldn't save me. Rituals couldn't sever her. Even other spirits refused to stand against her. If you think you're stronger, braver, or smarter than me, believe me, you're not. Loneliness makes fools of us all. It whispers that even a ghost's love is better than no love at all. But once you open the door, you can't close it. You can't unspeak vows. You can't unlove the dead. I hear the vows again every night. Sometimes in whispers, sometimes loud enough to rattle the windows. And sometimes, God help me, I still whisper them back. Not because I want to, not because I believe them, but because a part of me is terrified of what happens if I don't. Maybe that's how she wins. Maybe that's how they all win. So this is my warning, my plea. If you've ever heard of spirit marriages, or if you know anyone who's tried, tell me below. Please, I need to know I'm not alone. I need to know someone else survived. Because maybe I'm already gone. Maybe I've been gone since the night I said, I do. And maybe, just maybe, you're next.